Hi, everyone. I am so glad to welcome you to this session called How Do We Know It's Gerrymandered with Jonathan Mattingly. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce him and then I will hand it over. And I'm really thrilled to have him here because I'm sure that a lot of you are big redistricting nerds and so am I. And I've just totally been waiting for this presentation. So Jonathan Mattingly grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. He graduated from the North Carolina School of Math and Science and received a BS in Applied Mathematics with a concentration in physics from Yale University. His expertise is in the long-time behavior of stochastic systems, including randomly forced fluid dynamics, turbulence, stochastic algorithms used in molecular dynamics and Bayesian sampling, and stochasticity in biochemical networks. But since 2013, he has also been working to understand and quantify gerrymandering and its interaction with the region's geopolitical landscape. This has led him to testify in a number of court cases, including in Common Cause versus Lewis, which led to both North Carolina legislative maps being deemed unconstitutional and replaced for the 2020 elections. So we are so glad to have you here, Dr. Mattingly, and really looking for this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I've really enjoyed the panels and presentations I've heard so far. They've been really interesting. So I want to tell you a little bit about the work my group's done and try to explain how we think about it. And I guess I really want to emphasize understanding gerrymandering. And this is a work of a team, which is led by myself and Greg Hirschlag, who are both at Duke. And Greg may be in the audience, and so when we get to questions, maybe he'll answer some of them. So, oops, there we go. That's always. So as was mentioned, we've been involved in a number of court cases in North Carolina, Common Cause v. Rucho, as well as Common Cause v. Lewis and various other ones, and also some questions around racial gerrymandering in the remedial phase of Covington. So we've been involved in a number of different questions around gerrymandering. And here's kind of my goals for the talk. So I want to explain to you, I'm sorry if I get a little wonky as you were warned at the intro, which I actually don't apologize for. I think it's important that we all be quantitatively literate, and some methods that we use to analyze redistricting. And I want to help you think the way I've come to think about thinking critically about redistricting. And that's really how this all started for me. And I want to provide some understanding so that I think my goal is to always provide understanding and let people make their own decisions. I don't want to beat them up with math and say, look, if this number is over this red line, it's bad. Trust me, that's not a good answer for me. And then maybe if I have a little time, which I may not, I'll talk a little bit about county clustering and what that means for redistricting in North Carolina moving forward. Okay. All right. So I think I don't need to belabor this, but let me just kind of run through this once. Here we have North Carolina. These are our 3,000 odd precincts. Here's Durham, where I'm sitting at the moment, vaguely. Here are the districts we use to elect. So I'm going to talk both about state legislature and congressional delegation. A lot of my slides were set up for congressional delegation because that usually plays to a bigger audience, but I will talk about both, and it's relevant for both. But let me use congressional redistricting as an example for a moment. So here we have the 13 congressional districts that we used in 2016 to run an election. Here we have the votes precinct by precinct. Bluer is more Democrat, redder is more Republican. You count them up and you end up electing a bunch of representatives, right? Here they are. There are our representatives. So we end up with these representatives. So in that election, we ended up with 3 Democrats and 10 Republicans. And you can see what the size of the vote was. It was a little bit more Republican in that election, but it certainly didn't represent this split we see here. And one of my questions to you, to challenge you to think about, is that may not actually be the point completely, all right? And of course, it's really this delegation that we send to Washington. They're the ones who represent us, so the vote doesn't matter, it's who we send, right? All right, so what is gerrymandering? So gerrymandering is, here's the textbook definition, to manipulate boundaries, to change the outcome of an election by gerrymandering the results. And I've highlighted 2 words here in red, which is where I want you to start your critical thinking about this, is, manipulate the outcome, change the outcome. It somehow presupposes that you had an idea of what it should have been before. And so I really want, to ask, how do we know that? And what do we think the answer should have been, right? That's where we start. And, in the background of my mind is it something around what would have happened if there had not been political agendas, right? All right, so here are kind of 4 maps we're going to talk about. These are 4 historic maps, well, really 3 historic maps. We'll kind of be a little bit for them. So the first one is the one we used in 2012, NC 2012. That was the famous map we used that was drawn after the last census in 2010. That was thrown out as a racial gerrymander. We ended up with the map that's labeled 2016. And then we ended up with the North Carolina remedial map. And then this bipartisan map of judges, which was some maps that exercise that Tom Ross ran called Beyond Gerrymandering, that brought in tried to run what a nonpartisan bipartisan redistricting commission might have looked like. All right, so again, back to this definition. So I want to emphasize those words in red. So let's throw out some straw men, some ways people often think about that. So here's 2 states that went to the Supreme Court together, North Carolina and Maryland. And here's the fraction of votes, right? 55% Democrat, 48% Republican in 2012. Statewide vote count, if you looked at all the congressional votes, same Maryland, you see. And here's the size of the delegation. So 33% Democrat, 87% Democrat in Maryland when there was only 63% of the votes, right? So you might say, well, that's gerrymandering, right? Clearly. Well, the problem is, though, is that our system is not a proportional representation system. That's not our system. It's, if we want to, so what I really want to encourage people to do intellectually is separate 2 ideas. There may be real reasons we don't like our system. Okay, that's fine. We can try to change that. But then there's a separate question about, given the rules of our system, how is it implemented? And that's really the question that's in front of me when people ask me, is something gerrymandered or not, right? That's what I'm supposed to be answering, okay? So, oops, that's interesting. Good, there it comes, delayed. So here are those 4 maps again, and you might look at them and you might say, wow, that 2012 map looks really funny. And those other maps all look pretty similar. They don't look so different, right? Unless you're a real cognoscentia of North Carolina geography and political geography, you might not immediately notice. If you are, you might right away notice how Asheville is treated differently in the maps at the top and the maps at the bottom, and that may be a flag for you. But what I submit to you is that the top 2 maps are actually politically equivalent. They act pretty much the same. So gerrymandering is not about strange districts. So, if you see a strange district, you might be worried, but just because you don't see any strange districts doesn't mean it's not gerrymandered. And rules that say don't make strange districts aren't going to stop people from gerrymandering. All right. So I want to make sure people hear that really loud. All right. And so they make nice coffee cups. They make nice T-shirts. They make nice posters at rallies. I've certainly carried them. But, we have to be careful if we want to convince people of things to use that too often as what we mean as gerrymandering. And same with proportional representation. I'm going to try to dissuade you of immediately going to proportional representation. That's, I think, a disservice a little bit to the cause also. All right, so here are some ideas that people often use. Proportional representation, I've already talked about that. Some idea of partisan symmetry. So what that means is if we switch roles, then whatever happened to you should happen to me, and whatever happened to me should happen to you. Okay, that sounds really great. That's a wonderful, equal, fair idea. But the problem is that it's usually applied at the level of statewide vote counts. And it misses the fact that votes are distributed geographically in very, very different ways. And so it's often applied in a very facile, shallow way, and we have to be careful about that. And then the efficiency gap, I have to tell you, is pretty wrought with problems, and I'm not really going to go into it. I don't think people are really using it anymore. For a while, it was the darling of everyone talking about it, but I would dissuade you from using the efficiency gap either. All right, so what I want to do is I want to talk about evaluating the system we have. So now back to the slide again. So I'm still sticking with this as being the right thing to talk about, but we need to have some idea to talk about what should have happened. And when I say should have, it's like, what might happen? I'm not about predicting the future. Because people's political votes change all the time. Different blocks vote in different ways. Charlotte votes different than Raleigh sometimes. Raleigh votes, the suburbs, Cary votes different than Raleigh. The mountains vote different than the beach. It depends a lot on different elections. There's a lot of things in play. All right, so let's go back to this map we had a moment ago. Here's that 2016 election. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the votes exactly the same precinct by precinct, but I'm going to draw new boundaries. Okay, so here I've drawn two different maps. I'm flipping back and forth, so hopefully over Zoom, the little animation will work well enough. You can see that the lines are changing, all right? So the one that I'm switching to should not be taken as fair either. In fact, it was drawn by 538 blog as the most democratically gerrymandered map they could make in North Carolina. So let's take those votes and let's recount the election. All right. And I've labeled who would have won, and here's the delegation that would have gone to Washington. Remember, last time we had 310, and this time now we have five Republicans and the remainder Democrats. So I'm not saying this was the fair outcome either, but I'm just trying to make the point about how much can change depending on who draws the line, right? We like to wake up the morning after an election and talk about the will of the people being expressed in the votes. But so much depends on how we interpret that election based on how they drew the lines. I think everyone on this webinar already knows that, or else you might not be here. But part of this organization. All right, so what I want to talk about, and this is what we did in court, was we asked, well, let's make a whole bunch of maps. And let's compare the outcomes over a whole bunch of maps that were drawn in a nonpartisan way, use no political information, and then compare what happened. Okay, so we're going to compare maps. So here are our floor maps. Here they are again. We're going to make a whole bunch of new maps. And that's not enough, maybe. Here's a whole bunch of more maps. So this is what I would call our ensemble of maps. And these are sometimes referred to in the press as ensemble techniques. So we're going to create a whole bunch of maps. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at those maps and say, if your map doesn't act the way these maps do, you should explain yourself. Maybe there's a good reason. Maybe there was a political constituency that you wanted to keep whole that we haven't taken into account when we drew these maps. That's perfectly fine, but I want to, in court, to shift the onus to someone having to explain why, all right? Okay, so let me walk through what happened. So this is the kind of analysis that I presented in these different cases, or my part of my team, my collaborators who presented. So here's a map, map 1. I calculate it, and 3 Democrats are elected and 10 Republicans. And so I'm going to keep track of the number of Democrats elected. So I put a little bar at 3. Then here's another map that had 8 Democrats elected. So I put a little bar at 8. Here's another one at 6. Here's another one at 6. Here's map 5 at 5 Democrats elected. And I keep doing this, building it up, right? And I end up what's called a histogram, all right? So here's that histogram now, over 24,000 maps. So I didn't just make 30 maps, I made 24,000 maps, and I compared it. And then I show you what the map we used in 2016 did. Here it is, only electing 3 Democrats. When the vast majority of our maps elected 5 or 6 Democrats. I'm not saying that's what should have happened, but that's what a typical map did. And now if we take the map, when that map was thrown out, so some people might be upset, say like, well, the outcome wasn't what I wanted in the last election. Well, it was a big difference. It changed things a lot, right? Every election is different, but if we use the same votes as 2016, it would have elected 5. And there's some evidence you could talk about that maybe what was done was just a less extreme gerrymander. We can have that conversation. Let me see where we are in time. But here's the votes from 2012, the votes from 2016. The purple and the orange maps are the maps we actually used in our elections. And the remedial map is the map that we used in 2020. And the judges map was the map that came out of this bipartisan redistricting commission. It was not a real redistricting commission. It was a simulation. It was an academic exercise of 5 retired Republican judges, 5 Democratic retired judges who got together to try to model, what they thought was better behavior. And here is the outcome. So you see, they're much more representative, right? They're in the fat part of this blue distribution, of this blue histogram, all right? Okay, very good. All right, so now I'm going to show you a movie. And this was the kind of movie I actually showed in court. This one did not get shown, but I'll show you one soon that did. And the things to notice here is what's going to happen. I won't go into the details of how we do this, but we take a particular spatial vote pattern of voting in North Carolina, and we create some shifts of it. So we take the statewide vote fraction from 42% all the way up to the mid-50s. And what I want you to watch is right now, this was the map we used in the election in 2016. It was the enacted map. And notice it looks pretty good. it's right in the middle of this blue distribution, right? That means it's pretty good. And now as I go here, we're going to watch it go, and you notice this percentage is increasing. And notice that as the percentage increases, it never changes the outcome. And it's only when it gets very, very, very high, like right about now, it seems to change. So it was well over 50%. I'm going to show it to you again. So here, let me just go back. Here it comes again. And now this time when it comes, I'm going to stop it just as it gets, just when it hits 50. Okay, so there we go. All the way to 50% almost, nothing has changed. We've had this huge swing in what the typical maps did. This blue histogram shifted from on top of the enacted map all the way over to be centered more around in the middle, right? But this enacted map never moved. So that map that the legislature drew is essentially designed to protect an outcome, right? It was whether they understood exactly, the effect was that it had this firewall effect. It never moved. It was non-responsive. So elections had no outcomes. I mean, elections had no consequences, right? There was no changes. It's not until we keep going a little bit more. Here we are, still right about now it starts to shift. So it's not until it's already 53% Democrat, the vote fraction statewide. And as you know, from a very purple state we know we are, that's a 53% to one side is not what typically happens in elections in our state. All right. Now I'm going to show you the state house. So this is the state legislature, right? We have a bicameral legislature. This is the house in the state legislature, 120 seats. These three lines you should pay attention to is this is the supermajority line. This is where the control of the Senate, of the House changes parties. And this is the supermajority line for the Democrats. And so right now at 45% Democratic vote, the enacted map does a pretty good job. It's right in the middle of the blue histogram. Now let's watch what happens. So the votes, watch this counter here. The vote count starts increasing, and slowly the blue histogram is moving to the right. Not surprisingly, more Democratic votes, more Democrats elected. That's what should happen. But notice the enacted map hasn't moved at all, or barely moves. And notice that right now, the blue histogram has completely broken the supermajority. There's not a map left that left the supermajority in power, but the enacted map has a very comfortable supermajority, and we're just at 51%. So first of all, notice one thing. This is not proportional representation, right? At 51% Republican, they still have a pretty sizable majority, right? We haven't broken the majority at all, right? With any of our maps. Okay, now here we go. Still shifting. So, right, so I mean, just to be clear, right, we were at 51% Democrats and there still was a majority Republican control. That's just the way the system works, right? That's because there's we have some idea about spatial representation, right? And sometimes there's really good reasons for that, right? We don't want, just because Charlotte and Raleigh are the two biggest population counts, we don't necessarily want them to ride roughshod over every other part of the state. That's kind of a principle of our distributed democracy. And this is one of its consequences. If we don't like that, we can change it, right? And now we keep going. So now notice right about now, so we're up to 53% already. Democrat, that's a pretty heavy swing Democrat, but by now it's breaking the majority. But notice here, 54%, it's not broke, it's completely broken the majority, but the enacted map hasn't broken the majority at all. So it really was a strong, it protected against swings. But you also should notice that proportional representation is not what to expect. Don't just look at the statewide vote counts and say, wow, if we could have 51% of the seats, because I don't think that's what's going to happen as long as we have a distributed thing, all right? But still, the map that they had really protected their supermajority, which has a huge effect, as we all know, right? Protecting the supermajority has a huge effect. All right. So now, and let's notice, so this was the map we ended up with. So the map, the yellow line is the one we used in the 2020 election. So that was the one that was, the purple map was overturned, and this was the map that was put in place by the courts, or by the legislature under the courts' supervision, right? We all remember the bingo machines. All right, so here we go. Now notice that this yellow map acts much more reasonably. It's not perfect. We can talk about in what ways I think it's complicated still, but it's certainly different than the purple map, right? It overturned the supermajority much earlier. and it tracks this histogram, right? In many ways that are much better. I mean, there's lots still complications in it. It sticks here for a while, right? Before it's definitely at the far Republican side of what we typically would see if we drew a map. Okay. All right. This one acted a little differently because this time we're using the votes from 2016. And so that's another thing I want to make you understand is here I've taken a whole bunch of historical elections from North Carolina. This is governor 2012, a very far at the bottom is more Republican. The vertical axis is at the bottom is more Republican, at the top is more Democrat. This is statewide vote fraction. This was a very Republican election, a lot more so. And as it shifts up, you see the blue histograms move to the right. And the thing to notice is that, you know, here's two elections, governor 2008. I mean, these weren't actually for the state legislature, but we're pretending that they were. The 2008 governor vote counts and the commissioner of insurance vote counts. They have the same statewide vote fraction, but they have completely different outcomes. So it really, you can't just, it's not as simple as just looking at statewide vote counts. You really have to understand where the votes are. Where the votes are have a huge effect on how they interact with our redistricting. All right. Okay, so that's why I have a little box around that one. I want you to make sure that you notice that, right? That you can't just like, there's no like, well, if you have this statewide vote count, this is what's going to happen. It matters a lot where the votes are because of our spatially distributed legislature system. Okay. Okay. All right. So here's some complications. So I'll be a Debbie Downer for just a moment, right? First of all, it's not proportional representation. If it was proportional representation, these blue histograms would line right up on this black line. They don't, right? They trend like it, but there is definitely a tilt. Here's some maps from Wisconsin, which we also did an analysis of. And in Wisconsin, there are actual spatial, so it's a little complicated to explain this, but this says what percentage of votes based on different spatial structures they needed to get 50% of the seats in the legislature. So you see, they needed only 49% of this vote to get 50% of the seats. And in some elections, they actually only needed 46% of the votes to get 50% of the seats. But these points where the arrows are is actually what happened under the map that they used in their elections. And you see it has a huge bias to the Republican Party. You needed many less Republicans vote counts to get 50% of the seats. So there can be a bias in our system if you think we live in a proportional representation. And I would say it's not a bias. I mean, it is what our system does, right? It's a consequence of our system. Again, if we don't like that, we can have a different conversation about changing it, but that's not a conversation about gerrymandering under the rules that we have. All right. So there was also a lot of press about splitting A&T in half. And I think that's, you know, it certainly was very suggestive that they chose to put a district right down the middle of A&T, right? A historical Black college, you know, with a large density of African-American voters that, you know, typically vote Democrat. By splitting them in two, they split it. But the truth is what, you know, there are many, many precincts in a congressional district. And putting one on one side and one on the other side doesn't change the outcome. And in fact, if you looked at any two pairs of districts, we can do an analysis and ask how often were they had a line down the middle. The A&T district, you know, North Carolina A&T was split about as typical as any other district was. So it wasn't that unusual that A&T got split. What is unusual is that A&T got split and downtown Greensboro got split this way and that place got split that way. It's the cumulative effect of all of those splits that caused the problem, right? It's not one particular split. I mean, you know, we also have to talk about messaging, so it's important to have cases like this to talk about. But if we said you have to unsplit this one, it wouldn't have changed anything about the district, right? It was a symptom of what happened and not to be confused with the cause of what happened, right? So I'm not gonna do the math there. But, you know, so I was a little Debbie Downer for a second. I'll come back and say, but look, when we won the cases, it really made a difference, right? We shifted from these purple and orange to this yellow map, right? But, you know, elections, you know, it still matters how everyone votes, right? The one on the left was Obama's election. This was Trump's election, and you see that there was a Republican shift. So, you know, that's still important, right? Obviously. All right. So I'm getting, let's see, how am I doing on time? Okay, I'm getting close to my end. I want to just point out a little bit. We can still say a lot though. We can go in and talk about, so I'm not going to go in and explain all the details of this. If somebody really wants me to, I can. But what I want you to notice is that the remedial map is the yellow, the judges is the green. They look kind of similar, and they're right in the middle of these boxes here, which is what should typically happen. And it doesn't take an expert to notice that the orange lines and the purple lines look different, right? They just look different. And what's happening here is what we call packing and cracking. So you might hear about packing and cracking of districts. So we have, our analysis gives us the ability to detect packing and cracking. So these Democratic districts had abnormally many. So this is Democratic, what this axis here is percentage of Democratic votes in those districts. So these 3 districts had abnormally many Democrats in them. And these 3 districts had abnormally few Democrats. And this huge jump between here and here is what causes that non-responsiveness that we saw in the video I showed you. The fact that that map never changed when you change the political votes, right? And so this is what we need to fight against. We need to fight against elections not having consequences, no matter what your political side is, right? I think, any politician who's at all being honest should say that when the political opinion changes sufficiently, there should be changes in who's elected, right? And when there's not, we have a problem with our democracy. And I think that leads to a lot of voter disenfranchisement, but I'm not an expert of political opinion. You should ask some of my colleagues at Chapel Hill and Duke about that. All right, so, okay, I want to just end with one last thing, which is an interesting peculiarity of North Carolina. And I think how am I doing? Oops.
You're good, and also don't worry, we have built in a little bit of a buffer, so.
Yeah, but I want to make sure we have lots of questions. I'm happy to answer questions, so I like that part the best. So county clusters. So let me just say a little bit. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not even a lawyer on TV. So don't take this understanding. This is my received understanding. So there are two constitutional issues in tension. At the federal level, we have this ruling of 1 person, 1 vote, which leads to the congressional level, like every district having within 1 vote of each other, usually, according to the census counts. And at the state level, we have an idea that in our Constitution says you should not split counties when you make state legislative districts. The problem is that's impossible because Mecklenburg and Wake, for instance, already have more people than 1 district should, and they don't happen to have exactly the number of people that 2 districts or 5 districts should, right? They're not an integer number, a whole number of districts. So there was a court case, and it said you have to do the following thing. You have to take all the counties in North Carolina and clump them into county clusters, okay? And then those county clusters should be divided into congressional districts. So here is the dividing for the state Senate, I believe. So, here's a particular county cluster right here that was divided up into 3 districts, right? And here's another one divided up, okay? So these were divided up into different districts. So the purple, these were clusters that were divided up, all right? So this was 1 county cluster. So this space was divided into 3 districts. So what happens in North Carolina is there's a judge's ruling that essentially gives an algorithm that first says you clump all the counties together into chunks that are as close as you can get to whole numbers of districts. And then you divide those clumps, okay? And one of the issues in the court case was, well, one side said that would prevent gerrymandering. It doesn't at all, first of all. Somebody says that, they're wrong. You can do a huge amount of gerrymandering while still preserving the county clustering. But one thing that's really interesting to think about is here's the current ones on the left-hand side of the screen. These are the current county clusters, and it's not unique. There was actually some choice that was made. The legislature made some choices, and that's an interesting question. And here, using some projection, we don't actually have the 2020 census, but in 2019, we had some projections about what 2020 might look like. Here's what they looked like then. And one thing that's interesting is that these look quite different than these, right? Here, down here, this all had to be subdivided into a number of state Senate districts. And here they're cut completely differently. And there's a number of choices to be made. You could choose this cluster up here where B is. You could choose one of these clusters where the A is. And what I think that's really interesting is that it may actually force some incumbents out of their seats because it may change districts in a way that no one has a choice about, which in a way I don't think people have completely appreciated yet. You know, that's always been a complicated question, why we value incumbency, especially when we come from a redistricting that was ruled illegal to one which was supposed to be a remedy. Why we would preserve incumbency across that, I find complicated. But I think it will be an interesting moment what's going to happen, because this law is still in effect. This ruling is still in effect. It's going to force North Carolina to form county clusters first. And we've released some code, actually. There was actually something introduced in the legislature that said that they should actually use our computer program. But if anyone wants to, it's very easy to use. If you have if you're at all anyone analytic at all, we have some Python code, if you know what that means, that's publicly available. And you can use it once the census comes out to figure out what the county clusters should be and what the options are. It actually produces all of the possible county clusters for the state of North Carolina and what they would be. And we're actually proud of that. That was written with some high school students, actually, at my old high school, North Carolina School of Science and Math. Oops, that was a mistake. Oh, that was supposed to be commented out. You don't want to hear about Maryland. We're not going to talk about Maryland right now. So let me summarize. So, okay, I told you about some work my team has done, and I'll just say that, this stuff has had an effect. There's mathematicians now, a number of us across the country, in Pennsylvania, in Boston, in various places, talking about the mathematics. We're just trying to understand that. And I mean, I'll say there's a lot of interesting questions on the horizon. How does differential privacy in the census affect redistricting? We don't really understand that yet. And I can tell you a little bit about differential privacy if you want to. It's a complication. But here's my kind of summary of redistricting. So we tried to use a collection of unbiased maps to benchmark redistricting. And as soon as the census happens, we're going to try to do the same thing again for North Carolina. We're going to release them. So when you guys are out talking to people, hopefully soon you'll have maps that give you some idea of what a realistic benchmark should be, what we should be expecting if somebody didn't put their finger on the scale. It may not be exactly what you want. I don't know what it's going to look like, because I don't know how our new population centers are going to interact with redistricting yet. I just don't know yet. I'm really interested to find out. But, and I think I wanted to sway people from immediately going to facile arguments about proportional representation or symmetry. I think they can come back to bite you as often as help you, right? They can bite you when you start talking about minority representation. There's a whole bunch of complications there. And another interesting thing will be to understand the effect of the county clustering and what that will do to incumbency. We don't know yet, all right? And I will just point out, I am an educator. I'm a researcher, but I'm also an educator. And these are all the undergraduates, a number of them from North Carolina. This all started with a senior thesis at Duke by Christy Von Graves, who was a North Carolina native also. And a number of all the people at the UG next to them were undergraduates. And thanks to the Duke Provost and Dean's office and the Rhodes Initiative at Duke that helped, and the Paulus Center for Policy at Duke that all helped actually support financially this work so that it can be done. And Common Cause too, actually, with some support. So that's really all I wanted to say. And I'll just say one thing. I mean, my journey to this started one day, a Monday in a summer outside the legislature building, where I was there for a rally on a Moral Monday. And there was a day about redistricting, and the person there said, hey, look at the effect redistricting is having on suppressing the expression of our political will. And I was really struck by it and how the effect it had. Then they went on to say that obviously we should have 7 seats to their party, which was the Democratic Party. And I started saying, I wasn't sure if that was true. And so that led me to go through this whole quest. So I think that there has been some egregious gerrymandering. I think we have to be a little careful about overstating what it will end up being next, but I will tell you that the cases that we've won have had real effects. So, and with that, I'll end, and I'll open it up to any questions that, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and so we do have some questions. I'm going to take a point of personal privilege and ask a question myself first, just because this is something I've been thinking about for a while.
Yep.
So you showed those videos where you have sort of this firewall where the enacted map is kind of holding the supermajority for a lot longer than the ensemble maps would, right?
Yeah, right.
How are they creating that firewall in the first place? Are they doing the same thing? Are they creating ensembles and then kind of choosing?
No, I mean, they may next time, right? That's the interesting question, is what's going to happen next time. But what they're really doing is they're understanding how to, they have some, whether it's analytic, whether Hoffler was fully responsible for every part of this, or whether, I mean, we all know if you're a political animal in the state, you have some idea of where people live. And they really are taking pretty fine scale maps and splitting them. It's cracking and packing. That firewall comes from what you would normally see as some kind of nice continuous distribution of districts that have, just because there's a district that has 70% Democrats doesn't mean we have gerrymandering. That's just what happens. I defy you to draw a congressional redistricting in North Carolina without something close to 70% Democrats. It's very hard. It's just where we live. And about 63% Republican. So going to be a district that's about 63% Republican. That's just going to happen. Like, it's not clear that the answer is always competitive districts, because our elections change, and competitive for one election will not be competitive for the next election, I'll tell you, right? And so this kind of, if you just draw them without paying attention to partisan, you get some gradual, as opinions switch, it changes. But what they do is they pack a whole bunch of Democrats in some districts, and they remove a bunch of Democrats from other districts. So they create this huge jump in those plots. And that means that over a wide range of outcomes, you see no change. And that's what causes that, right? And I think that, people have an understanding of how to crack and pack, right? You give up some votes in districts that you are going to win anyway, or we're going to lose anyway, and you put them in districts that you might have lost. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened. That's what the Democrats did in Maryland too, by the way. Same thing.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. I've always wondered about that. Those videos of yours, and I think they're really impressive, but it also always led me to that question. So a question from Gabe that I wanted to ask is sort of, when you go back further, so when you go back to say 2008 or even earlier when things are under Democratic control, you see exactly the same sort of gerrymandering on the other side, or does it have different characteristics?
So that's a super question. And part of the problem is that we haven't had the same ability. I mean, things became much more digital, right? And so we don't have the old maps in quite the same way. So we don't actually have the pre-2010 maps coded in. We haven't done that. We've thought about doing it, but there were always other things to do. And it's something that's on our list. So I can't actually tell you about the Democrats, but I can tell you that when you look at Maryland, when the Democrats gerrymander there, they essentially did the same thing, right? They essentially created, so let me see. I won't show you Maryland. Yeah, I can, right here. So they did something similar here. There was essentially this jump here is the red map that they used. So they made this last district much more Democrat and this district much more Republican. And that made sure that the Republicans always won a seat. They essentially made that seat safe. Right? It's not there's no danger of switching the majority in Maryland, but they could make this seat much safer, and also this seat much safer. What might have happened more often than not is sometimes the Republicans would win 2 seats, and actually in some elections the Republicans would have had no seats in Maryland, right? But this kind of compromise said, okay, we're going to always keep one, and you can have the 7, right? So I don't, that's what that seems to be the general structure, and the same thing happened when you looked at the remedial map. Let me see if I can show you the remedial map quickly. I don't seem to have the remedial map. That's my mistake. So, okay. But it's this kind of jump. If you look at the remedial map, it has a similar jump, but not as big. And it's centered around the 5-7 split. Or 5-8, sorry, I don't do math very well. 5/8 split. So it's the same kind of thing. They made the 5 of them safer, for one party, and then the remaining ones safer for the other party.
So sort of related to that, Virginia is asking, is there, because we think we're going to add a 14th district in the congressional maps, is there more potential for competitive districts? I know we're in a situation where we have pretty safe districts right now on our congressional maps. Will that create the possibility of more competitive districts? Or?
I mean, look, we had the opportunity for competitive districts already, right? So I'm going to split the question into 2 parts, right? The potential, if you understood that question, I mean, could people have drawn districts where there was this more, right? Yeah, sure. I mean, oh, actually, here is the remedial map. I apologize. There it is, right there. So that jump right here, right, is that jump that protects this one being 5 and here, right? That jump. It's not nearly as bad as this jump, right? that was what we had before. So it's a much better map, right? But it's not perfect. I don't know. The other end of that question, I think it was Virginia that asked, was that, is it going to keep people from being if somebody acts in bad faith, will there be stops that will make it harder for them to act as in bad faith? I don't know. There's a lot of things going on there. It's hard to predict that until we really see what the structure of the census count will be, right? It's going to be very interesting to compare. And it's also, there is actually differences sometimes between, at the scale of state house, scale of state senate, scale of congressional delegation, right? Those are very different scales. And it's not inconceivable that who has the advantage based on kind of geographic clustering could shift across those different scales, right? It's not one size fits all always.
So going off of a question Nadine's asking, so last night we did talk a little bit at one of the panels about county clusters or county groupings and sort of
Sorry, I wasn't there. I apologize.
Yeah, so just a little bit about what they are and how they kind of once you have those in place, they do exert a lot of influence.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, what kind of effects do county groupings really have? How big of how important are they in terms of gerrymandering?
Right. So the reason I've gone into some weird mode all of a sudden is I'm now going to, I suppressed a slide because it was I didn't want to walk out too much on you, and I was really worried about my time.
It's never too much.
Yeah, I was worried about my time. So these are two county clusters. This was data that was presented in the court case that led to the maps being overturned. These are figures from that case. So the bottom, this is Robeson, right? This is Pender. This is Columbus, Pender, Robeson.
Oh, no,
right?
that looks like Cumberland to me, actually.
Is it? Maybe I made a mistake.
Cumberland.
You're right. Maybe I made a mistake. Okay, maybe I grabbed the wrong district. Thanks. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, this is definitely Mecklenburg. I grew up there. I recognize it instantly. I know I can point to my house on here. So the point is that you still see exactly the same kind of jump, right? This means that these districts here were packed and these were cracked. This jump between here means that there really was the same kind of, that was the defense partially. It was like, look, there's no way we could have gerrymandered because of the county clustering rule. The point was that there was still a lot of freedom to county cluster. Look at this one. This one is about as Republican as you could make it. And this one was about as Democratic as you could make it. So this one was packed and this one was cracked from the Democratic point of view. And that led to this big jump here, right? And this one was, look how most of the maps, this seat would have flipped. I think it did flip, but it barely flipped, right? And this one didn't flip, and it might have flipped under these vote counts, right? So, it's not like, so the way you have to think about it is in every one of these county clusters, if you just shifted a few percentage points this way, let's think about it this way. We have 120 seats. There's a bunch of them that are just set, basically. They're counties, you can't, but there's a whole bunch that you can still redraw. And let's say that on every one of them, if you were to flip a coin randomly, and the coin had a certain percentage of heads, a certain percentage of tails. If I replace that with a coin that's slightly biased to my party, and then do it over and over and over again in every one of those ones, the effect means that this total number of seats elected shifts to one party. And so you just need to pick up a little bit of an advantage in this county cluster and that county cluster and this county cluster and that county cluster. And that's what we saw. So the answer is yes, there was a lot of space for gerrymandering still, even though the county clustering law was, that was what the case was about, right? That was the core question of the case.
Yeah, I think also one thing that we had talked about last night a little bit was that the county clusters themselves. I know that from some of the mapping people that I've talked to that, we assume that there will probably be at least more than one cluster option according to the formula that they're created by, and that in of itself, the choice of clusters may also have an effect.
Yeah, so that's what this actually shows. So this means that in the section here that's white with A, you could pick any one of these. And in the section that was B here, you could pick any one of these. Yeah. I have to be honest that when this was actually the choices in 2000, we didn't see that making that big of a difference in here. But if you have a whole bunch of choices, you could imagine it having a difference. I will never, we'll have to see. And it's very fragile. It changes rather dramatically. We took the American Home Survey and we did in a paper, which I can, if anyone wants the link, we actually went through and did the county clusters for every time there was one. American Family Survey, I think it's called, sorry. And we then looked at what the county clusters would be, and they can change quite dramatically from year to year, just based on population counts. It's quite fragile. They can change quite dramatically. So I'm anticipating pretty dramatic shifts in the county clusters when we go to redraw our state legislature. I think some people maybe who aren't ready for that may be surprised.
Well, we're definitely gonna see that. And so sort of as our last question, and as a follow-up to that, as we're going through this process in 2021, are we going to see this kind of analysis being done on the maps that are being worked on and presented in the legislature in real time so that people have some of this information? Because I think people in our audience especially are interested in being able to, challenge the process or ask questions about the process based on information like the information that you've just presented to us.
Yeah, so a couple answers to that. One is that we and others fully intend to perform this analysis before any maps are released, to give some kind of idea of benchmarks. And we're talking with various people about maybe having some public events. So we talk about what the effects of the 2020 census are. We also we run a blog called Quantifying Gerrymandering. If you Google Duke and quantifying gerrymandering, I'm pretty sure you'll find it. I can send you the link. So it's a blog, and we write lots of little short blog posts about that, And also we try to create stuff to empower people to understand, and people being citizens, people being legislators, people being press, right? And various people. Thank you, Greg. Just typed it in. Greg's he should be up here with me, but he's been politely in the background. So Greg Herzog just dropped in the chat. Thank you, Greg. We want to empower journalists and everyone to talk about this. Various journalists have done a really good job of picking up on some of these quantitative techniques and using them in their own discussions, right? We don't want it just to be, we want there to be some idea of truth so that people can have conversations around truth, not just everyone says something and then it's all different and no one knows what to think.
All right, well, I think we're going to wrap it up. I'm sorry if we didn't get to someone's questions, but this was really fascinating, and I'm really, really glad that you were able to come. And also, I saw that your colleague Greg Herzog has been in the chat answering some people's questions, so that's also been great. And yeah, this was a wonderful session. And so at 12 coming up, we are going to have our next session, which is going to be with Common Cause, Democracy North Carolina, and Apex branch of the NAACP. And we are going to be talking in that session about redistricting reform, the reform proposals we've seen in the past, the ones we've seen more recently, what we think the shape of reform is going to look like in the future. So please join us then at 12 p.m. We're going to close out this webinar, so we're going to end it, but you are going to use the exact same link to join that next session. You may get a screen that says, waiting to enter, and that just means that we're setting up with the next panelists, and so you'll be admitted to the webinar as soon as everything's ready at 12 p.m. All right, well, thank you again to Dr. Mattingly and for this great presentation. I'm so glad that you were able to come.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having us.
All right, we'll see everyone in a few minutes. Bye.